Now the Jayhawks will get a heave up, and it goes in! Malik, an unbelievable shot. It will count, and that could be a spark that the Jayhawks need.
This is the Westmoreland on the Hardwood Podcast on the Westmoreland Sports Network. Here are your hosts, Jack Ridenour and Sean Meyers.
Welcome into another edition of the Westmoreland on the Hardwood Podcast. Sean Meyers joined by Jack Ridenour talking about the biggest stories across Westmoreland County high school basketball. Back for our third episode, and Jack, we got a lot to get to. We have, of course, the Plays of the Week segment. We'll talk about our team of the week. It is the Greensburg Central Catholic Centurions girls, coming off of a couple of big wins. We'll have our trivia question as well as the answer to last week. And a look ahead, we'll have a lot of broadcasts this upcoming week on WSN and some other notable games across Westmoreland County. But let's begin with our starting five, the biggest takeaways that we had from this past week. And it was a game you and I broadcast together Friday night. Greensburg Central Catholic, Jeanette boys. We know it's always a big rivalry. And this one in particular got a little feisty. The Centurions won pretty decidedly in the second half. But man, there was, I think, 5 technicals, multiple players either ejected or fouled out, a lot of whistles, a lot of foul shots. It was, I think, a typical Jeanette GCC type of environment.
Well, I'll tell everybody at home, I'm not from the area, so this was my first ever experience in an atmosphere like that for GCC Jeanette basketball, and it lived up to the billing. It really did. I mean, like you said, the environment was loud, it was raucous, it was exciting, and it was a great ball game. I think the first half was very up-tempo. Obviously, we had a nice buzzer beater half-court shot right at the buzzer for halftime.
We might see that one in a little bit.
We might, you never know. But and then you go into the second half, and like you said, technical fouls just plagued that whole second half, especially the third quarter. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, all 5 technical fouls were all in the second half, and I think 3 of them happened in the third quarter alone.
Yeah, it was kind of an atmosphere where we knew it was intense. We saw that early, but then I think the officials coming out of the locker room said, we're not going to let this get out of hand, which I never really got the feel that it was out of hand or that it was headed that direction, but they were proactive, and the players and maybe even some of the coaches didn't really adjust quickly enough.
No, not at all. And I think you saw that it bothered Jeanette more so than it did GCC because, GCC, they also got hit with a couple foul calls they didn't like. Ryan Kimmel got a technical foul himself. So they were also frustrated with things. But I think really the difference down the stretch was Franco Alvarez. I mean, 20 points. And if I'm not mistaken, 18 of them or 16 of them coming in the second half alone really was a non-factor in the first half, woke up in the second half, and they just had Jeanette, that is, had no answer for Alvarez, and especially with all the foul trouble that they had on their end as well.
Yeah, Alvarez did have 18 of his 20 in the second half. Big win for GCC, by the way, in the section, because now Jeanette below 500, GCC conversely sitting at 3-1, so they've got a good shot at this point to at least have the inside track for the playoffs. Well, another team that's sinking playoffs is the Norwin Knights boys. And this is a program that they've had some coaching changes. They've had, some struggles, quite frankly, in recent years. And I think this year, maybe you're starting to see that they're going to compete. And especially when they get slam dunks like we saw from Adam Belinsky. And then when they get buzzer beaters to lift them to victories in conference play. This Norwin team, again, we don't know exactly how it's going to pan out because they're playing in basically a whole new section. And yet right now, 1-1, but they're 7-3 overall. They look like a team that certainly can compete with anyone in 6A.
And I think that, especially that, like I mentioned before, having an Adam Belinsky that's healthy, that's always a great asset to have. But the thing that I do worry about, and just going off their recent game this past Friday against Upper St. Clair in a loss, Adam Belinsky has 21 points. The next highest score is Justin Weaver with 10. That, I think, has to be a little bit of a difference down the stretch. They need to have some more help. They need to have somebody else that can step up. Obviously, a guy like Ryan Edwards, who has 26 against Thomas Jefferson, that's a perfect example of a great sign where, okay, somebody else can step up in a game where Belinsky only had 12 points. So they have to have somebody else help out with Adam Belinsky, because if not, it's going to make things tough for him to score on his own, but also it'll make things easy for defenses to just focus on Belinsky.
Yeah, and that buzzer beater we talked about for Edwards, that came at Cannon Mac, 46-45. And so that's a big-time shot to get them their first conference win. Now, you kind of mentioned they did not follow up with victory. They lost against Upper St. Clair. And then they have other teams like Baldwin and Mount Lebanon coming up. Those will not be easy tests. But to get a win like that, to get your first conference win, and basically, like I said, a whole new conference, that could go a long way. Well, it wasn't necessarily a buzzer beater, but it was plenty of three-pointers for Ellie Snyder of Greater Latrobe. Listen to this. 10 three-pointers made in their victory last week against Connellsville. Man, she is a good player. She's always been good from her freshman year. I did not know she was that good of a shooter. I think of her more of sort of like she's a forward that has some guard ability. If she continues to play like that, you have to wonder, they're not going to replace Emma Blair, but this team still maybe can compete with her and Camille Dominic and some of the other guards that they have. But that was an eye-opening performance, setting a girls record and tying an all-time Greater Latrobe basketball record that also included the boys.
Yeah, I mean, she went 10 of 15 from deep, 12 of 19 from the floor. Mind you, she had 7 of her 10 threes in the first half. Her coach was quoted saying afterwards that it was the best shooting performance that he had ever seen as a coach. So that, again, kind of just sums up for you the performance that she had. But then also, just to throw this in there, Sean, she missed the first 6 games of the season resting an ankle injury from volleyball season. Okay, and for people that did not play basketball, taking that much time off, having to get into shape, and then all of a sudden you're scoring 30-plus points in a game, that is very hard to do. And the fact that she was able to make that quick of a turnaround with missing a good bit of the first part of the season, hats off to her. An unbelievable performance.
Yeah, and her coach, Mark Burkhardt's been around a while, so it holds more weight when he says something like that. And again, they're probably not going to be the team we thought they were, because they're not going to be at full strength with Blair out, but with Snyder and Dominic, 2 forwards who have guard ability, I still think they can be a very dangerous team, and they just put up 81 in that victory against Connellsville. Well, talk about prolific scoring on the girls' side. Look no further than the leading scorer in all of the WPIAL, Tiffany Zellmore of Mount Pleasant area, and she continues to do it right around 30 points per game. It is just incredible what she is doing. And I think it has really, by and large, gone under the radar because Mount Pleasant's not a team that's made a lot of noise in the last couple of seasons. Wow, she's been putting up these big numbers, but she's taken her game to an even higher level here in the 22-23 season.
Well, she's giving, I think, a lot of notice to everybody else that this Mount Pleasant team, they can compete with her. I mean, they're a 9-3 team right now, and a couple numbers that just jump out immediately for Zellmore's scoring. As of January 4th, she had contributed to 59.7% of her team's scoring. That's 333 of her team's 558 points. I have to give a big shout out to Mr. Bill Beckner for those numbers. But she had also has games of scoring 41 this year, 37, 36, 26, 31, 35, 38. And I mean, you can't get much better than that, especially in the high school level and playing, 32 minutes of basketball. And you figure she might not be playing the whole 32 minutes, so maybe 28, 25, and she's still putting up those numbers. But it's not just her that can score. They've got other players like Nina Province, Kayla Rumbaugh, other players that can, I think, also fill up the stat sheet that, are younger. They're sophomores. So it might not just be this year, but could be years to come that this Mount Pleasant team can make a lot of noise.
Yeah, the Vikings had a 4-game winning streak snapped last time out in a loss. But yeah, so this is obviously a team that is relying upon Zellmore, but by and large, she has answered. She's got some broad shoulders to carry the scoring burden there for the Vikings and having a lot of success doing so. Well, a team that really has not had much success at all for a long, long time is the Jeanette girls basketball team. But we're going to finish up our starting 5 with a real positive development because they won a game, and it had been a long, long time, 50-plus game losing streak that they snapped last week. And I know for Anna Leonard, the first-year head coach, how excited she was. And for some of the players, especially the upperclassmen who had been through multiple seasons of nothing but losses, I can only imagine how great that felt. And now the question is, can they build on it? Because they were really close to winning multiple games earlier this season.
Yeah, this is a big morale booster for this group right now. And it not only for this senior group and the older players, but also for the younger players, right? I mean, you think with a first-year head coach, a lot of younger players on the team as well, they're all going to start to grow and develop as players and as a coach, simultaneously as the years go by. And they'll be able to look back at this moment as, hey, we were here when we were able to break this long losing streak, and then we were able to kind of build from there. So this could be really the beginning signs of a totally different chapter for this Jeannette girls basketball program.
Yeah, 51-game losing streak snapped. Now, they did lose their next game afterwards, but against a pretty good St. Joseph's team. By the way, their victory, it was not a nail-biter. They won 68-13 against Hillel Academy. So congrats to the Jeannette Jayhawks ladies. Well, let's now move on to the plays of the week, as we picked out 3 plays from the past week that we had broadcasts of here on the Westmoreland Sports Network. And we will begin with the Norwin girls, as the Knights scored another impressive win last week. They pulled away from North Allegheny in the second half of their section opener. It was Bailey Snowberger who continued to make highlight reel plays as she patted the Norwin lead in the third, as called by myself and the one and only Roger Downs.
No shot clock, so you don't mind a minute possession if you have the lead. Tip to Snowberger. Oh, and a reverse. What a shot. Bailey Snowberger.
That's another candidate for play of the week right there. Well, Jack, Snowberger, she doesn't score a ton, but she's the type of player when, you need a play to be made, even if it's not a basket, she's often there to provide it. She's been a steady presence, and she's just one of the many cogs in what's been a great run for Norway.
Yeah, very crafty player. I love kind of the either spin move or the half spin move that she sometimes does. Very forgotten move that not many players do these days, so it's nice to see a little hint of the old school.
Jack, you hinted to this one. Our next play of the week is the Jeannette boys. And although the Jayhawks lost their rivalry matchup against GCC, it was Isaiah Malik who hit a shot that brought the Jeannette faithful to their feet as time expired in the first half, as called by myself and Jack.
They bring Crosby with his 2 fouls back onto the floor for this offensive possession. Turner, probing, throws it up wildly, and now the Jayhawks will get a heave up, and it goes in! Malik, an unbelievable shot. It will count, and that could be a spark that the Jayhawks need.
Well, Sean, I think it was just called by you because, as you said after the call, my mouth was wide open. I still have a bruise on my chin from hitting the floor. I mean, unbelievable shot. I was actually, mentioning off air, when he shot it, it looked on complete line. I thought to myself, that's going in, and sure enough, it did.
Yeah, and ultimately it did not do enough to spark them to a win, but that was a pretty electric moment there at GCC for the visiting team. We'll conclude plays of the week with the Borough boys as the Buccaneers won a county matchup against Derry area last Tuesday. And it was Mackie Venice who asserted his will in the fourth quarter, making a couple of big plays in a matter of just a few seconds to extend the lead, as called by John Flickinger and Bob Lisinski.
8-point game, a lot of time left. There's a step back 3 and nothing but net. Well, Venice, it took a while, but the good players find a way, and he's back on the board here in the second half.
Third trade tonight.
Papuga throws that away, 2-on-1 the other way, behind the back into Buchak. And just like that, Burrell is back up by 13.
Yeah, a 5-point swing right there.
Timeout, Trojans.
Heck of a play there, the step back 3, then the steal, then the behind the back pass for the assist. And it's one of those things where a game can change in a matter of 3 or 4 seconds, and sometimes your best player just needs to take a game over. That's exactly what he did.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beautiful thing about basketball. In 1 or 2 possessions, things can change drastically.
Let's now shift to our team of the week. I mentioned it at the onset. It is the Greensburg Central Catholic Centurions girls, who improved to 10-2 overall and a perfect 4-0 in Class 2A Section 3 play. Well, this past week, first game, a lopsided win against Springdale. They won 56-19, and that was, maybe expected. But it was, I think, a toss-up when they hosted Sarah Catholic. Both teams went undefeated in section play last year. Now, they were in different sections last year. Realignment brought them into the same section. So it was a highly anticipated matchup, and the Centurions found a way to eke out a victory despite trailing late in the third quarter. But it's not just what they've done this week, Jack. This is a team who has been terrific all season long. They knocked off Neshannock earlier, and what really opened a lot of eyes, that was at Neshannock. And so you look at some of the other wins, this is a team that I think realistically is a 2A championship contender, and they solidified that this past week with that win against Sarah.
Well, they're doing it with scoring the ball and also not allowing their opponents to score the ball at all. They average the second highest points per game in the section at 54.9, and they allow the second fewest points per game in the section at 34.2. So when you're winning ball games like that in a 20-point separation at times, it's hard for other teams to come back. So I think that is a big sign going forward for this GCC girls basketball team, but they're going to definitely be challenged this Thursday. They've got a big one against a Clareton team that has been also playing very well, and I think could challenge this team for a section title.
Well, you talked about going forward. How good is this team going to be in seasons to come? They really are primarily relying on players who have eligibility remaining. Probably their best player, at least their best scorer, is a freshman in Erica Gribble. And we know the last name Gribble, championships at Norwin with older sister Elena Olivia, who I recently featured in a Westmoreland alum Q&A, also a great Norwin Knights player. And now Erica forging her own path at GCC. She had a team high 16 in the win against Sarah Catholic. Maya Morgan, probably their second best player. She's a junior. They get Avery Davis, a junior who transferred in from Norwin. Kara Dupilka, who I was really impressed with. I didn't know much about her, but she had a big game against Sarah Catholic. Katie Peters is a senior, but it's a team that doesn't have a lot of seniors. They have another freshman in Abby DeLugos off the bench. So this team, you figure when you're relying so much on juniors and even freshmen, it's a team that's probably going to grow even more throughout the season. And I think hopefully we will see that from GCC, and they've already strung together 4-game and 3-game winning streaks.
Yeah, and they're winners of 7 of their last 8. And I think when you've got, players that are playing this well together as freshmen, sophomores, juniors, it's not just this year, it's the years to come. And it's not just getting better as players individually, but it's developing that chemistry and that connectivity on the floor that also gets better, that by the time they're seniors, they're already 3 steps ahead of each other of where they're going to be on the floor. So that chemistry can really be a dangerous thing for other teams to have to guard and go up against.
Yeah, and lastly, you have to give a lot of credit to the head coach, Chris Skattel, second-year guy. He has a lot of ties with AAU, so he's coached some of these girls. He's got a lot of connections there, and it seemingly has paid dividends this season. Greensburg Central Catholic girls, 10-2, 4-0 in section play, 2-0 last week. They are our team of the week. That means it's now time for our trivia question. And so first, before we get to this week's trivia question, let's look back to last week. The question was, as of January 1st, which is when our show aired last week, which Westmoreland County boys team had the highest scoring average? And Jack, do you know what the answer was?
I do know the answer. Do you know the answer, Mr. Meyers?
I came up with the question, so hopefully I do. It was the Westmoreland Scotties. Now, averaging 66 points per game, I thought that was a little surprising. We know Ty Keffer has been outstanding, but you figured it was, going to be one of these perennial power teams like a GCC, like a Bell Vernon with all their reinforcements that we talked about. They had almost a 100-point game. But ultimately it was the Southmoreland Scotties. So a little surprised. And not far behind them, at least at the time, was Derry area. The Trojans were second. So a little surprising sometimes when you look at the scoring numbers. So we did not have, as far as I saw, anyone who guessed correctly. I did see a guess, but it was incorrect. So that should encourage everyone here. We'll give all the shout outs for everyone who guesses correctly to chime in on this one. And I will preface this. I had done significant research trying to find how to pronounce the name of the player for Aquinas Academy who's been incredible throughout his career. I never found out how to pronounce it. I asked some people. So we're going to guess Vinny Cugini, who is, again, on pace to have the all-time career scoring record. He'll probably set that later this month or potentially early in February if all goes according to plan. But he is on pace to become the all-time career scoring leader in WPIAL boys basketball. That's not the question. The question is, the current record holder is from Westmoreland County. So who has the record and how many points did he score in his career? Jack, don't chime in. You have to keep this to yourself. We want everyone to provide their guesses. You can do so by tweeting at Westmoreland SN and use the hashtag on the hardwood accompanied by your guess. So again, the real question is, who is the leading scorer in WPIAL boys basketball history for their career? He's in Westmoreland County. Who is it and how many points did he score? We will have the answer next week.
I have to say, Sean,
yep.
I have to say, just looking at the number, obviously not going to reveal it, but it is a staggering amount of points. Staggering.
Yeah, it's the record for a good reason. It is a pretty incredible number. And the fact that Vinny is likely going to break that. And I think he's averaging like 40 plus points per game this year for Aquinas is just incredible. He's a Pitt Johnstown commit. So we will likely see a lot of him in the future going against Seton Hill with our coverage here on the Westmoreland Sports Network. Lastly, let's take a look ahead. We're going to have plenty of broadcasts on WSN, but there's just some really good games overall involving Westmoreland County teams. So first off, we'll look at the boys. Tuesday night, that's the big night. Tuesday, Friday for boys, usually Monday, Thursday for girls. Tuesday, we're going to have Derry area hosting Valley and Penn Trafford hosting McKeesport. Those will both be broadcast on WSN. But there's some other big games. Franklin Regional at Greater Latrobe. Listen to this one. Bell Vernon at Laurel Highlands. That is going to be electric. York and Mount Pleasant, and Clairton at Jeanette. And so the game I want to focus on there is Bell Vernon and Laurel Highlands. With the great players that the Leopards have, obviously you think of Quentin Martin and then Rodney Gallagher on the Laurel Highlands side, but he's not the only one. They've got some great players around him, the Shields as well. That was a game, I believe, last year that both Pat Narduzzi and James Franklin attended simultaneously because they were recruiting both Gallagher and Quentin Martin for football. But man, you think about what they do on the gridiron. It's some terrific basketball players, not just those two, but all around. That's a big time matchup. And the Leopards trying to bounce back after a loss.
Yeah. And again, I mean, Bell Vernon with Mr. Moore, Zion Moore. I mean, you can't get much better than a guy that's been scoring, 20 plus, 30 plus points a game this entire season. So that's going to be a fun one. But then also the other game that I'm looking at, Sean, is the Clairton at Jeanette game on Tuesday, simply because Jeanette, with, I think, a much needed bounce back win in the section, and then also look to see how maybe Clairton handles a Jeanette team. And then if Clairton comes out on top, I'm going to be very excited to see a GCC Clairton matchup down the road this season.
Well, you will get that on Friday, Jack, because the Centurions will be at Clairton to battle the Bears. Also, Franklin Regional at Gateway. That's always a good rivalry matchup between those bordering schools in Murraysville and Monroeville. And then one we will have the broadcast of. Excited about this. Greater Latrobe at Penn Trafford. PT's been down this year. Greater Latrobe kind of middle of the pack. They have the Butler boys providing a lot there, and John Wetzel, the son of the head coach. But that's a team, or that's a matchup of teams that really, I think, need to get in the win column between the Wildcats and the Warriors. Let's look on the girls' side. Hempfield at Norwin Monday. That should be a good matchup. And really, it's a team in Norwin that has the look of a title contender. They have to make sure they don't have any slip-ups. And Hempfield's had some decent wins, although they're not quite to the Norwin level yet. But I can tell you, Tom Brush and every single Spartans player, they're going to be up for this game because everyone has Norwin as the team to beat now. So you get more amped up for a matchup like that, I would think.
Yeah, and I mean, Norwin has a target on their back right now, and they're going to have a target on their back this entire season. Even when a team beats them, they're still going to have a target on their back because of how good they are, how well that they've played against other fellow, class, 3A or 4A WPIAL championship teams, even a Mount Lebanon team that was the 6A champion. So, this is a very good Norwin team that people are going to want to beat. And I think Hempfield, they can go into that with the mindset of, hey, let's jump all over Norwin early. Let's get this big early section win and carry some momentum with us throughout the rest of the year.
Yeah, and for any team that at this point does beat Norwin, that's a season-changing type of victory. So I'm sure that's on the mind of the Spartans. Other good ones on Monday, Franklin Regional at Indiana, Penn Trafford at Oakland Catholic, and then a Westmoreland County matchup between the Borough Buccaneers and the Ligonier Valley Rams. Fast forward to Thursday. Jack, you're going to be on the call of this one. McKeesport at Penn Trafford, and the girls for PT playing some really good basketball, but we know McKeesport is the one and only team that's defeated Norwin, and that speaks to how good the Tigers are with their suffocating defense. They pitched a shutout, holding Norwin scoreless for an entire quarter, so that should be a terrific showdown.
Well, McKeesport's proven that they can do that type of defensive damage to a team like Norwin. We'll see what they can do with a team like PT that's got a player like Olivia Pepple that, right now she's showing that she's capable of playing at the Division I level.
Yeah, absolutely. She's garnering interest, deservedly so. Other matchups on Thursday, Elizabeth Forward at Bell Vernon area, Ligonier Valley at Mount Pleasant, and Greensburg Central Catholic, our reigning team of the week, trying to keep it up as they will be at Clairton. Lastly, we will have some college hoops on Wednesday as Slippery Rock will battle Seton Hill. That will be in Greensburg at the McKenna Center, a doubleheader for both the women and the men. That's all that I have. Jack, anything else you wanted to highlight before we put a bow on this one?
Just excited for another jam-packed week of basketball in the Westmoreland County area and right here on Westmoreland Sports Network as well.
Yeah, last week was exciting because it officially started section play for every team. Most of them had already started it in December, but for the ones who didn't, everyone now playing section games. So you're usually getting them 2 of them a week for most of these teams. Makes for some very important basketball over the next month plus. That'll do it for this edition of the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast. We'll catch you again next week. It'll be Sean and Jack coming to you right here on the Westmoreland Sports Network.
This is the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast on the Westmoreland Sports Network.